what is feminism? Let's talk about it. Let's get straight to it. Feminism is defined as the full social, economic, and political equality of women. Now, when you hear feminism, you think about it in the West, and particularly in the US. There are women all over the world trying to fight for specific and different rights. There are women in other countries who are fighting just to drive a freaking car. It's worldwide. But when we say feminism, especially us in the US, we're thinking about the feminism that is here, the history. And that's what I'm going to be talking about. Feminism in the US. So let's go. Now, there are 4 waves of feminism. So when you say, are you a feminist? I say, which wave? So, first wave. The first wave began in 1848 at the Seneca Fall Convention. That is in upstate New York. About 300 men and women both, came together to talk about women's rights. They've drawn up like 12 resolutions about what they wanted to fight for. Opportunities for education, land ownership, and of course, voting. So back in that time, before that time, the only people who could vote were men who are 21 years old and who owned property. So there were actually men who couldn't vote either if they didn't own land. And since women were not allowed to own land, of course they cannot be allowed to vote. So women are like, no, we should be able to own land, thus hence we should also be able to vote. Then in 1868, the 14th Amendment was drawn up where now all men born in the US can vote, 21 and above, even if you didn't own land. But still the ladies couldn't own no land, so it didn't help them none, so they still carried on the fight. We're talking about white men and women that could vote, because nobody else could. Not even Native Americans. Early stages of the first wave feminism crossed ties with abolitionists, people who were fighting against slavery. So the women were fighting for their right to vote and also fighting for, the freedom of slaves. There were famous Black or African American activists that spoke at the Seneca Fall Convention. Frederick Douglass did, Sojourner Truth, Maria Stewart, and Francis E. W. Harper. They were also arguing for women's right to vote, as well as the freedom of the slaves. Despite the Black people supporting the white women who wanted, to own property and vote, Black people were still seen as inferior, even though they joined forces to try to all get their rights because they were all being oppressed. So they felt like they could come together and fight together to get what they need. But Black people were still seen inferior during protests. Black women were barred from protesting, getting the right to vote, and they were put in the back of white women because you couldn't have side by side. Of course, although we're fighting for your rights as well, you're still inferior, so step behind. But then in 1870, the 15th Amendment was passed, which allowed Black men now the right to vote. The white women were like, what? Former slaves? Field hands get the right to vote before us? They are inferior to us. One woman said in this article, a white woman said, if educated women are not as fit to decide who shall be the rulers of this country as field hands, then where is the use of culture or any brain at all? Another said, one might as well have been born on the plantation. Now, although Black men got the right to vote, they were still barred and discriminated against, and they were discouraged from voting. There were literacy tests. A lot of people were just coming out of slavery. Black people didn't have a lot of access to education, so they couldn't read. So that was an easy way to keep them from voting, even though they still had the right to vote. And plus, also poll taxes. People are poor, can afford these things. So although they had the right to vote, a lot of them still couldn't. Now in 1910, the state of Washington allowed their women in that state to vote and to run for office, but it was only locally. In 1916, Margaret Sanger, look her up, she probably needs a video all her own. Now Miss Sanger opened up a clinic in New York State, although it was against the law, to distribute contraception. She went on later to establish Planned Parenthood. Now, Planned Parenthood, Sanger, Black community, that's a whole topic on its own, but I won't get into that. Maybe later on. Finally, in 1920, Congress passed the 19th Amendment that allowed all women 21 and over the right to vote. That's included Black women as well. Although same thing with the Black men, although they had the right to vote, they were still barred, discouraged, intimidated, getting literacy tests that they couldn't pass, poll taxes that they couldn't pay. They all got the right to vote finally, but it was more a win for white women at that time, although Black people were on their side, but on paper they got their rights as well. But side note, in 1924, Native Americans were finally given the right to vote and be called citizens of the United States of America. Okay, so that's the first wave. First wave feminist goal was to get the right to vote, and they succeeded. Good for them. second wave. Now, the second wave began in 1963 when a woman named Betty Friedan wrote a book called The Feminine Mystique. It sold 3 million copies in 3 years. It dealt with systemic sexism, the idea that the woman's place was in the home and she's only good for domestic purposes or decorative purposes. So where the first wave focused on the political equality of women, the second wave dealt with the social equality of women. Didn't see her highest purpose as domestic, then mentally something was wrong with her. Friedan wrote, "I thought there was something wrong with me because I didn't have an orgasm waxing the kitchen floor." Maybe she was waxing that floor wrong. Maybe I should go wax my floor. See how that goes. So that book got in the hands of millions of white middle class women in the US. Women who were told that their place is in the home, and they got upset. They were angry. Now, all the women who had to work anyway and to support themselves, like this second wave wasn't really that big a deal to them. Like, especially like, black women, poor white women, or any woman that just had to work anyway. They were already outside the house working. They just wanted to be paid well. So the idea that all women were home, not working, and a man was providing for them, that all women, especially black women, is not true. Most black women were out there working as well. So the second wave feminism, because of this whole feminine mystique, it didn't apply to them. They were already working. They just pay me and treat me correctly. So in 1963, the Equal Pay Act came about. So that was supposed to help with the gender gap. Men and women were supposed to be paid equally. So there was a lot of other things the second wave dealt with. In the 60s and the 70s, there was a bunch of Supreme Court cases which allowed women the rights, married and unmarried women. They gave them the right to birth control. Title IX, women were given the right to equal education. And of course, 1973, the most famous one, Roe versus Wade, where women had the rights to abortion. Now, both men and women wanted rights to reproduction. They wanted control of their bodies. But you see how the middle class white women was looking for a way to get out of the home and not domestic creatures. They didn't want to be just seen as objects. Black women, that wasn't their focus. They were already working outside the home. What their focus was, stop the forced sterilization of women of color and people with disabilities. So their feminism looked a lot different from white middle class women's feminism. So then there was a branch, the black feminists. They created their own groups that dealt with their issues, and they called themselves womanists. Alice Walker in 1983 said, "Womanist is to feminists like as purple is to lavender." So during this time, the second wave, women also got the right to hold credit cards in their names, apply for mortgages, marital assault and was outlawed. There was an increase in awareness about domestic violence. During this time, a lot of shelters were built for women who are fleeing domestic violence because before they had nowhere to go. Now this awareness is here, more shelters were built. Also within the second wave, and at their social image, they look in just a decorative light, not like human beings, just some object. In 1968, some women protested a Miss America pageant by putting on a pageant of their own. This group called the Red Stockings made a counter pageant, and they crowned a sheep Miss America, and they threw all these oppressive symbols of objectification into a garbage bin, and that was like bras, lipstick, makeup. They threw it in a can. So that's where the stereotype came in, where they thought the second wavers were bra burners, but there was never ever a mass bra burning. It was just that pageant. They threw bras into a trash can and lipstick and makeup and just said we're throwing that symbol of objectification away. This idea that feminists, they threw away these things. That means, oh my gosh, all the things that make them beautiful. That means they're hairy-legged and ugly and just nasty and mean. And that's where that image of that hairy-legged feminist came about. So, and then it became undesirable to call yourself a feminist. Ugh, you don't wear makeup. Make sure you look attractive and beautiful. Ugh. And you must hate men, and you don't shave, and you're ugh. With that, the image of the third wave feminists. Keep that in mind. Wave number 3. The third wave began in 1991 with Anita Hill testifying against Sir Thomas because of sexual harassment allegations, work sexual harassment allegations. With that, it spurred up the third wave of feminists because women are being harassed at work, and that's not right. Although she testified against him, and it created this storm of a lot of women finally coming forward and saying, this guy's been sexually harassing me at work too. And now during the second wave, it was illegal to harass women at work, but still, it was still happening, and women weren't stepping forward and talking about it and doing something about it. So this helped move it to where, no, we're going to speak up now. Although he still became a Supreme Court judge. But now women are like, this is horrible. He still became a judge after this. Now we need more women in power so we can get more of the things we need. We need justice. We need more women in power. So that was also part of the third wave, looking at sexual harassment and also getting more women in office. So 1992 became the year of the woman. 24 women won seats in the House of Representatives and 3 more in the Senate. And this was the third wave. Now, the third wave also brought into intersectionality. They brought in the rights of trans women, because they're saying trans women are women. So there's all kinds of women, and we all need to come together and fight. You know, the whole womanist thing, black women have their own group. But there's some black women who joined the intersectional feminism. Now, another thing that influenced the third wave were these girl groups called Riot Girls. Took on the word girl as empowerment. The difference between them and the second wavers didn't like the word girl. They were women. You don't call a man who goes to college a college boy. You call them college men, and you call them college women. They rejected that idea of being called girls when they are adult. But the third wavers, now remember, the second wave had this image of them being hairy-legged and angry and manly and rah rah rah. Now the third wavers are trying to go against that and onto the other extreme. Now we're girls, we're empowered, and they started wearing more makeup and being more girly, and not even girl, like overly sexualized. They could be whatever they want and still fight for women's rights. It went to the opposite extreme, makeup and high heels and all. They expressed this new position that it's possible to wear a push-up bra and have a brain at the same time. They appropriated terms like slut, bitch, and their word now. You know what, I'm a bitch, and yeah. Now most third wavers, well, I don't know if most, but a lot don't like to call themselves feminists because of the negative connotation of the second wave feminists. Their appearance and hating men and all, and being hairy and unfeminine and all this stuff. Like, the first wave focus was voting, they got it. Second wave focus was getting outside the home, talking about, you know, white feminists, access to reproduction rights. They got it. First wave and the second wave, they got laws passed specifically for what they're fighting for, and they got it. Third wave, there was no real law. It was just like bringing awareness to sexual harassment at work, more women in office, you know, encouraging more women to run for office, and they did that. I don't know, they wanted to change the image of feminists to not being hairy-legged, angry, bitter, masculine women. So they went to flipping their image to saying, I can be sexy and brainy. I think the third wave feminism maybe is what people are upset about in regards to the image of women. Now there apparently is a fourth wave, and I think we're in that right now. Number 4, that began with the whole Me Too movement, that everyone should believe, every woman. There was a whole march with the pussy hats. I still don't know what part of the pussy that is. What part is that? Oh, okay. So yeah, the fourth wave is just, I think it's just about bringing awareness to women's issues, making sure that although laws are passed, that they're being implemented, and people are speaking out against harassment. Women are speaking out against being assaulted. They should be believed and supported. And people don't like using the word feminist because of this bad connotation that to call yourself a feminist means you hate men, because that's a long stereotype, and that's all it is. But for me, when I think about feminism, I'm thinking, you know, voting, being paid for my work. I do that too. I mean, I don't want to call myself a feminist because apparently it's a bad thing, you know, especially if you're a black woman. You don't call yourself a feminist. At most, if I'm looking for rights for black women particularly, I should be a womanist, not a feminist, because it began with white middle class women who weren't really looking out for the best interests of black women. I don't even know if women are calling themselves feminists anymore, because it's a bad F word. Like, the worst thing you could call someone is a feminist nowadays. Like, guys will use that as an insult to me. It's like, you're just a feminist. And I'm like, because in my mind, I'm thinking, yeah, I want to vote. What's wrong with that? I don't want to be sexually harassed at work. But they're not thinking that. I think they're saying you're a feminist, meaning you hate men and you're a slut or something. It's a lot to ingest, because feminism has had its waves and has had its positive outcomes, but then there are negative outcomes. Feminism is supposed to just be the idea that women, you have a choice. You can be whatever you want. You don't have to be one way or another way. But people have an idea that if you're a feminist, you're only one way. You can't be a traditional and still be a feminist. Sure you can. If you don't want to work, you want to stay home, take care of your kids, you can still call your feminist because it's your choice. We hear feminism ruined the black community. But I'm saying, which one? Was it the first wave where we got the right to vote, but we still couldn't vote really? Was it the second wave where we were already working outside the home, but now have reproduction rights, but we were getting sterilized against our wishes? Third wave, sexual harassment shouldn't be allowed. People should, if they did something wrong, should be punished. Fourth wave, I don't know. I don't know. It's a lot to ingest, and it's something that if people are sitting around discussing it, it's heavy, and I don't want to make this heavy. I just wanted to give little blips of each wave and how people view it or might view it. I would like to get everyone's opinion about what feminism is to you, what a feminist is to you, and how you see it, and how is it a good thing, is it a bad thing? Should we rename it today? What's wrong with fighting for women's rights? If their rights are being violated, I would say nothing. They say, oh, if you hate men, that means you're a feminist. Maybe we need another word for women who bash men all day, every day. That's not feminism, because doing that does what? I don't gain rights by bashing men or insulting men. Like if I'm fighting for a certain specific thing as a woman, insulting men, how's that being a feminist? I don't know. You guys, what are your thoughts? Help a sister out, because it's heavy. I was trying not to put too much of my thoughts in it. Tell me what you think. All right, thanks for watching. See you next time.